Apart from social media, could you show something else, like a prediction market or a derivatives exchange, something you would like to?
Yes, so the interesting thing about blockchain is that it can enable new kinds of like financial markets which are more trustless, more open to participation. So people have been using already this token technology, creating tokens. And yeah, but the issue with that is that they often create tokens just for the sake of creating tokens, or maybe they basically their tokens have issuer, so it's not decentralized in the sense that you might as well maintain this balance in a maybe Excel sheet or some centralized database. But I think about derivatives. It can be interesting.
Looking at the derivatives now.
Yeah, it's prediction market is like kind of a derivative.
Oh, it's very similar, yeah. So a derivatives exchange and a prediction market is almost the same thing.
Yeah, so the simplest method, which is could be done in principle on Bitcoin actually. So you have, let's say, Alice and Bob. They put their money together, so they making a bet with each other. Let's say like Bitcoin price goes up, then Bob gets more money. Bitcoin price goes down, Alice gets more money, so it becomes like a forward contract for difference between USD Bitcoin price. And then they have at some later point.
So they're kind of betting against each other, or?
Yes, so that's the simplest way is they can bet. So basically it's this like single contract. Where they can bet against each other, and the contract it affects payout. So usually you want some third party, like Oracle, to actually tell people what is happening. So you have this trust in the Oracle, but it can be self-decentralized. There might be many different parties agreeing to this. So that's a way that's more secure than just having Alice and Bob trying to figure it between themselves. What is different when we have more advanced blockchain? The problem is that we have here just Alice and Bob, and it's isolated. They can, like, let's say if Bob wants to liquidate this position, he depends on Alice as well wanting to do that.
So it's not networked into a bigger context.
Yeah. It's what the traders want. They want more flexibility. So they want basically their bets to be fungible. So for example, we can make more advanced ways to have accounting system where, let's say, we have same guys, Alice and Bob, and they want to trade, let's say $1. So Alice buys $1 for 10 Chroma tokens. And Bob does the inverse of that. So he has position which is negative $1, but plus 10 Chroma tokens. So together is this neutral. This always you have 0 in the end. So this is all virtual. And to enter this position, of course, they need a collateral. So basically, Alice might deposit some amount of Chroma tokens or other collateral into the system before they can make this contract. And later, the price changes. So when they do the reverse trade, let's say Chroma token went up, and they exchange it $1 for 9 tokens. So Alice in the end will have 1 token, and Bob will have, like if they do the reverse trade, +1. So that becomes a profit and loss. So Alice suffered a loss, Bob got a profit, and since they have like besides the trading account, they have a normal account, it will be just added or removed from their collateral. So with this kind of system, we can do it, add more users and make this token fungible. So maybe we have Claire, she can maybe buy this virtual dollar from Alice. So they can trade, like bigger amount of users can trade with each other, and they can, Bob at any time, he doesn't need to wait for Alice to do the reverse trade.
What makes Chromapolis unique here? Why would you implement this on Chromapolis and not on another system?
In principle, you can, many systems can potentially handle this, which are programmable. But on Chromapolis, there are some situations where you want to update a large number of accounts. Let's say they usually call it clearing, where you take all the profits and loss. And there are also exceptional situations where, let's say, maybe a dollar went down, so there is not enough for Alice to compensate.
So there is efficiency.
Yeah, so you want clearing to handle, to go through all the accounts, like if you do on the centralized system. On Chromapolis, you can do that. You can perform a query which updates all the accounts and updates the profit.
And also we have relational databases as an underpinning, which feels a little bit more stable, I think, than having a level DB or something storing transactions here and there.
Yeah, it's easier for a developer to conceptualize basically this account same way as he do. Basically, relational database, they are designed for accounting system basically. So it's easier to conceptualize how you work with it than going through this like key store values, so you can get lost. Of course, it can happen that coding complex system, that some tokens will be unaccounted for, so maybe this zero won't be here.
So for a certain level of complexity for the app developer, you would have more power with Chromapolis than with other blockchains. You would.
Yeah, presumably.
Yeah. So that's the thing, basically. Right. Okay. So how would we do this now? How do we get this into Chromapolis? What you just draw?
Well, you can just code it basically like that, to have a table with different kinds of assets, and then you just add kind of set. It depends on actual derivative market, if it is like futures of like a CFD. So you add the function to like restrict how big is position. To add the function of what happens if, let's say, if user is underwater, like we need to liquidate his position.
So you could easily enter functions and constraints into Chromapolis that would automatically take care of this.
In Chromapolis, we can write functions which are executed automatically at certain point of time. So let's say each time where the price changes, you can find users who might be very dangerously close. So for example, on Ethereum, they have a somewhat similar system, MakerDAO, and they require other users to actively engage with the system to kind of liquidate users who are bad. So they require interaction from other users. So it's like it depends on complex ecosystem to work. On Chromapolis, it can work in more direct way because the system itself can directly execute certain logic at when certain conditions are met at certain amount of time. So it becomes easier to create a more complex system this way.
How long would it take to prototype like a basic version of this, like a proof of concept or something?
Well, I think like for the backend, you can do it like if you understand the basically mechanics of it, the mathematics of it. I think it shouldn't take more than a day to implement it because it's fairly simple. Of course, it might take some time to like make sure this kind of mechanism you have, security mechanism for different positions. It will be, but it's more like of business development. The coding itself, should be pretty simple because we have relational database, which is basically an accounting system. You can do arbitrary condition queries, and this can be...
So this is an accounting system. Would you say that many games are also accounting systems in some way?
Yes, many strategy games, like they call 4X games, where you have exploration, research, and basically extermination, basically competition between players. They often accounting because you produce some resources, maybe mine resources, build some items, maybe battleships, and fight with other players. Of course, the fighting itself is not an accounting system. But
so this could be one diamond sword instead of $1, and this could be some other exchange between.
Yes. So you can, like, for example, it can be a farm game where you have like different kinds of, let's say, like resources like wheat, apples. You might have a futures market within a game. So actually, some of early games they had futures market, but it was like just one computer, it was simulated. With a blockchain, you can actually make this futures market a real one. You can actually have players trading against each other, so it becomes much more interesting.
So the blockchain can kind of bring clarity and fairness to this, because you can inspect what happens. There's clear what happens. You can see what happens. And with Chromapolis, you would also have a lot of power to do this, an expressive power that few other blockchains can match while creating this system. Right.